So let's see if this works. I think we should be online. Let's see. Yep. So we have this here. There we go. Yeah. I think we should be live. So yeah, let me know as usual if you can hear me and you can see me properly. We should be all right. Let me check what YouTube says, but I think we should be good to go. Yeah, I believe we are live. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are. Thanks for joining me today. And today it will be a very informal live stream. I'll talk about that in a second, but I hope will be valuable. So if you're watching for these later, I think I'll leave it on. So this was a live stream that has been recorded. So we'll have few questions. We'll have few things going on today. Hopefully interactive with everyone. We have Aruna from Bangalore, India. Hi, nice to see you here. Thanks for being with us tonight. So first of all, if you've been following the channel, you know that this is not the usual live stream setup. This is a new space. The reason being that I've been relocating lately. We're still moving. We've moved to a new place, and so I don't have my studio ready just yet. I'll have a bigger studio, a bigger space than I used to have before. And this is also the reason why I didn't have much videos lately. So yeah, today this is what we get. So hopefully is good enough. We will have a Q&A today about DevOps, Azure DevOps, and GitHub. Any topic in these areas. So if you want to know anything, let me know. I do have about 10 questions that I collected offline from either people that couldn't make it to today's or tonight's live. So they sent me the questions on a separate medium, whether Twitter, whether it's the Patreon, etc., or also from some YouTube videos. And I collected those questions because I think they are interesting and they can benefit everyone if we discuss them today. But as I said, I would obviously love to have more questions from the audience. So if you have anything that you want to know about DevOps, Azure DevOps, and GitHub, please do let me know in the chat, and I'll try my best to answer all the questions. With that said, if there's no question from the chat, let me take on the first question I have prepared. And this is from someone called New to DevOps, and he sent me this question in our Patreon. So if you're not into the Patreon channel or the Patreon server, you can find the link to join in all the video descriptions, including this live. And if you want to be part of a community of like-minded people talking about DevOps, we have experts, we have beginners and everything in between. Come join the Patreon server. Again, you have the link in the video description. Sorry, that was the Patreon. I thought I was talking about Discord, of course. If you want to join the community on Patreon, feel free to do that as well. It's still in the description, but that is it's a paid option for supporting the channel. All right, so the first question we have is from the Patreon. As I said, someone called New to DevOps, and it's asking, what is the one thing you recommend people do when adopting DevSecOps? Well, there's so many things that you can do when you adopt DevSecOps, but in my opinion, one of the most important ones that you can do is automating everything. For two reasons. First of all, because just for automating tasks, you take out the the human factor out of the equation, right? So all the human errors and typing and so on and so forth, and that itself allows you to focus yourself on the security, on the application bits, and so on and so forth. So that part of automation is always good. But then it comes on to the security aspect of automation, meaning that if you automate, you will be able to execute all the security tests, the security scanning, secret scanning, and so on and so forth. Again, in an automated fashion, so you don't have to worry about, oh, I forgot to execute that, I forgot this, I forgot that. You can do it just like that. It comes automated indeed, and after a while you even forget that you're running that until you hit like a security vulnerability, an issue, or something like that. So for me, when it comes to DevSecOps, automation is king. Of course, you need to adopt tools that allow you to automate properly, because you need to have like the security tools that allow you to scan your code or your infrastructure in a fast pace with very little false positives and so on and so forth. So, but automation for me is the king. Do you agree with that? Let me know in the chat. And as I mentioned before, let me know if you have any other question in the chat. And another thing I would say, still talking about DevSecOps, is shift left. Shift left is a must. I know it sounds obvious, but there's a lot of people trying to get into DevSecOps without realizing that shifting left on security is such an important thing to do. And they think that as long as they do security, it's good enough. And well, any security is better than no security. But if you do security just after the deployment, for example, or just in a later stage, it may be a problem, because if you identify an issue in production, for example, then it's much more costly to fix that issue, because you have to go through all the process again. And even worse, if you don't identify an issue and you have an exploit or someone taking advantage, or a data leak, for example, that's incredibly expensive for you and for the company. And I've seen companies going actually out of business because someone was able to infiltrate in the network, or was able to take advantage of a security issue in production. So shift left as much as possible is also something that I would highly recommend. All right, so still no questions from the chat, so I will go and take another question from my offline list. And this comes from someone called Yatesh Sugur, and it asked this under a Azure Pipelines related video on the channel. And the question is, I'm just posting it on the chat. Oh, it's too long. Oh, can I do these? Let's do this. So the question he sent me is this one. So once the pipeline is deployed, how will I know if the deployment was successful and the pods are running? Can I get a status message in the pipeline if it's completed? Well, there are a few ways to do so. First thing, Azure Pipelines has something called deployment gates or gates, which allow you to basically execute this kind of tests. For example, you can call an API, or you can, since we're talking about pods, you can interface with your Kubernetes cluster and understand if your deployment has successfully been applied, meaning that all the pods are running. And this will not basically hold your pipeline there, because one problem is that I've seen a lot of people trying to implement this kind of monitoring stuff from within a pipeline's job. But the problem is that if the deployment is quick, then that could work. But remember that no matter if you talk about Azure Pipelines or GitHub Actions or any other CI/CD systems, they usually have like a timeout that applies after a certain amount of time, or the whole execution of the pipelines cannot last more than that specific time. I think it's about half an hour for pipelines. Don't quote me on this. So if your deployment is not completed within half an hour, basically your pipeline will fail, even though maybe the deployment just took longer than you expect. So I would recommend use gates for that purpose. Another solution could be using the new manual validation task that has been introduced in the YAML pipelines. That, of course, going back to what I was saying before, since I think the automation is king, it's probably better if you use that as a last resource, only in cases in which you don't have a way to automate this kind of test, this kind of verification. So, but that's still another option. So that will basically pause your pipeline. While the pipeline is paused, there's no consumption in minutes, for example, if you're on hosted runners, or the timeout that I was talking about before does not apply. And then you can do whatever work behind the scenes to check that the deployment has gone all right, or the build is completed, and whatever you have to do. But yeah, if you can take advantage of the gates, I think it will be much better. We do have a question from the chat from Michael or Mikal, I don't know. Using Azure Pipelines, we are looking to make a main release pipeline and trigger a series of smaller release pipelines, one for each microservice. Good idea? If so, how would you do this? I need to guess that. So there could be two scenarios here, right? One is that you have a monorepo with all the microservices inside the same repo, and the second scenario is in the one that you have one repo per microservice. They, of course, can be dealt with in a different way. But one thing I would say, and I had this kind of question also on my Discord server before, I think that it depends on what you're trying to achieve, because this could be indication of a problem. And what I mean by that is, if you need to have a pipeline that then kicks off the other pipelines or the other release, for example, I wouldn't necessarily do that, because if you do that because all your microservices, for example, need to be deployed at the same time, it means that you're doing something wrong. Because microservices, by definition, they should be independent. So you should be able to deploy the microservice A now, and the microservice B the next day, and the microservice C yesterday. So that's the ideal situation. So if you have a need to deploy all of those at the same time, I would look into the architecture. With that said, if you still want to have, if you still want to have different deployment, you just want to have a way to kick them off at the same time, or you want to discriminate based on changes, for example, given that you say in the chat that is the scenario too, so you do have one microservice per repo. I would say I wouldn't necessarily create a single pipeline. I like to keep things independent. So especially because you have multiple repositories, then it's very easy to have like one pipeline per repo that builds and deploys that single microservice. And that doesn't mean that you need to duplicate code, because you can, I assume that all the microservices will be fairly similar in structure, or you will have probably like 2 or 3 kind of type of microservice, meaning technology, framework, etc. So you can create these 1, 2, 3 templates that you can store centrally, and then all these pipelines will basically just refer to that template, but perhaps introducing some specific action or specific task for that specific microservice. I think that I wouldn't necessarily create a main release pipeline. I've seen that done, as I said before, but usually is an indication of, as I mentioned, kind of incorrect architecture because of interdependent microservices. If you have that, of course, then that would be the only solution, right? But at that point, I'm not even sure I would create different pipelines for the different microservices. I would probably try and deploy everything from the same pipeline, unless you're trying to decouple that could be like an intermediate step to go then to fully independent ones. Hope this clarify. Hope this makes sense. We do have another question from Staker4. What is your thought, I believe, on versioning artifacts using semver? I like to use git version and conventional commits and renaming the pipeline based on this version to rename the pipeline to give visibility to what gets deployed. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of using semver. I normally again, there's two scenarios in my mind. One is like simple deployments, or where you have deployment cadence that is not very frequent. In that case, I think even versioning your artifact with just the date, for example, or the date plus the run of the pipeline or ECI, it's good enough. Using git commit or git version is also another possibility. And if you get to more frequent deployments, definitely using something, the git hash or the git commit or git version, that's probably the route I would go for. Also because, especially if you have a very frequent deployment, if you use semver, you may end up deploying, unless your deployment pipeline is very, very structured and very, very well controlled, you may end up deploying version 2 before version, or version 3 before version 2, especially if you're deploying different changes in different components. So it's something I don't necessarily do. I know it's one of the standards, so I know there's a lot of people doing it, but I personally prefer using something else, as you mentioned, like git version, or even the hash or the date. But I guess it's highly personal, and depends on the confidence the team has in the deployment processes and what your process look like. It's one of the things that, as long as you do it right, whatever method you use, it's fairly equivalent, in my opinion. And says, thanks for doing this. My pleasure. I love talking with you guys, sharing with the community and whatnot. So thanks for being with me tonight, or whatever time of day it's for you. All right. So let me pull up another question from the things I've saved. The reason why I'm showing this question, even though I think it's fairly simple, but I got this question a lot. The first one I received it from is someone called Reusable Chris in my Dev2, which is the platform I use for all my articles and written articles. So follow me there if you're not following me yet. And the question is, do you know how to set up? We were talking about Docker deployments, and the article was about deploying Docker containers to Azure Container Registry and do promotion of environments. Do you know how to set up if we want to deploy the image on-premise server with Docker install instead of provider container registry like ACR? And I think this is a question I get quite a few times every month, and I think it's baked because there's a misunderstanding, an underlying misunderstanding on how container deployments are done. And if you're not very proficient with containers, one thing you need to know is that you basically do need a container registry somehow, even if you deploy on-prem. Of course, if you deploy on-prem, you probably want to have a container registry on-prem as well, to store your images and then deploy your container workloads from there. It's not 100% mandatory having a container registry. You can deploy without having the Docker workloads, without having a container registry, but it's very not recommended. It's something I would never recommend to do. There is a workaround for that. There's a way you can deploy without using a container registry, which basically is packing your container image using the docker save command, and that saves it in a tar file, in a compressed tar file, and then move that tar file to your host, and to where you were running your container workload, and then rehydrate the image using the docker upload. No, I forgot the command. Docker load. If you use that, the tar will be basically unzipped and untar, and the image will be rehydrated, so you will have the image on the host. But this of course works for single servers, because if you have a fleet of servers or a cluster of servers that you want to deploy to, then you would need to do that for each individual server. And of course, if you're running in Kubernetes, you still would need to have a container registry. So this is the workaround. I would not endorse anyone using it. It's there, but even if you deploy on-prem, you do need you do want to have a container registry, even if it's on-prem. All right, let me drink something. It's fairly hot today here. Okay, no other questions from the chat, so I will continue with the offline questions I have. Oh, this is interesting, and it's actually it's basically referring to a scenario similar to the one we've seen before about the microservices, and it's this also, I think I had multiple users asking me this question on YouTube on the various CI/CD related videos I made, and it is basically regarding multi-repo and how to trigger only for specific projects, files, microservices, and so on and so forth. So if you have a multi-repo, right, let's talk about microservices, for example, or multiple projects, you will have all those projects inside a single repo. And then if you have either one or multiple pipelines, doesn't matter, but if you have a build trigger, that will trigger every time you change anything, right? Regardless if you're changing the project A, project B, or project C, because they are in the same repo. Well, I do like multi-repos, especially in Azure DevOps. In GitHub, the performances for multi-repos are slightly lower than the ones we have in Azure DevOps. So if you are in GitHub and if your multi-repo is fairly small, it's fine. If it starts being quite consistent and big, then probably you want to restructure that. But in general, whether you're using Azure Pipelines or you're using GitHub Actions, for example, you can filter the triggers based on path. So what I would normally recommend doing is, if you have, let's say you have project A, B, and C, I would create folders in the repo for project A, project B, and project C. And then I would filter the trigger of the pipelines or GitHub Actions based on that path. In Azure Pipelines, if I'm not wrong, in Azure Pipelines, you need to be specific. So you need to either include or exclude specific folders, files, and whatnot. In GitHub Actions, the default is include, and then you can exclude if you want to. And this is very useful not only for microservices, for example, or multi-repo, but sometimes you have different build processes, or what I like to use this for is for like linting and verification of files. So for example, if I have an application on my repo, and then I have some Docker files, and then I have some ARM templates, and then I have some for example, Kubernetes manifests, I don't want to have like the linter for the Kubernetes files running if I change some C# code which is completely unrelated. So I would have these filters in the triggers for the specific different pipelines or GitHub Actions that will execute that specific one that is for linting my Kubernetes files only if I actually change the Kubernetes files. And I know that because they are either in the Kubernetes folder or whatever folder you want to have it, or if it's more a generic YAML linter, then I would filter that by triggering that for all the .yaml and .yml files and something like that. So this is, in my opinion, the best way you have for achieving that kind of multi-repo hybrid pipeline triggering, if you will. And I think it works very well. And we used to do this. Actually, no, we still do this. They still do this in the Azure DevOps engineering. So the Azure DevOps itself, the project is in a single repository. Everything is in a single repository, but of course, different parts can be and should be built by themselves. And most of the things are done using path filters. Okay, so, and with this out of the way, again, let me know in the chat if you have any specific question about DevOps, Azure DevOps, or GitHub, or even DevSecOps that you want an answer for. I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. In the absence of, let me check if someone is there. Now, in the absence of other questions, I still have about 1, 2, 3, 4, I still have 6 questions that I collected offline from people that either couldn't make it tonight or that things I thought that could be interesting for all of you guys. Oh, this is also quite interesting. So I made a video fairly recently about I mentioned before, the new manual validation task in the in Azure Pipelines, and this question comes actually under that video was this Jane Kunyampa. I'm very sorry for the names, and they ask for this one. So I've lost the window. Yeah. So when should we use manual validation tasks instead of environment approvals? Which I think is a pretty good question, because if you know, you have the environment approvals in Azure Pipelines, as well as you have it in GitHub Actions. And this, I think, is one of the advantages of pipelines, because you also do have the manual validation task that you don't have yet in GitHub Actions. So for most of the things, I think using the environment approval, it's much better, but it's for approvals. The manual validation task is mostly for kind of breaking apart the job into sections and performing something in the meantime. One of those things, for example, could be you deploy to QA, right? And then maybe you want to verify that the deployment in QA went successfully, and you want to verify something that you cannot do otherwise with like API calls or anything like that before approving, because maybe approving the deployment would mean that your QA engineers can start testing out the application, for example, or something like that. So I would use it for this. Another scenario is if you have some particular build, and this is one of the scenario I've seen it used in an enterprise client I worked with recently. They had some very complex build, and they had to verify that the output of the build was exactly like they needed to be. And because of the nature of their build, and it was like binary files, and they had some programs that they had to use to verify that the build was successful and was compliant to what they had to achieve. And there was no way to automate that software, because it's a very legacy piece of application, and there was no way to automate the scan. So they had to like kind of pause the build, execute that manually on the artifact, and then continue with the automated process. If you are in situations like that, that's what the manual validation task is perfect for. Otherwise, go with approvals or with gates, as we discussed in the beginning of this streaming, and something like that. All right, guys. I see that there are few people in the stream. So if you have any question for me about DevOps, DevSecOps, GitHub, Azure DevOps, or why my studio doesn't look like the usual one, just let me know in the chat, and more than happy to reply, or to try at least to answer your questions. What else do we have? this is another question I get quite a bit. And if you follow the channel, I also posted like a poll in the community tab a while back, and this one also I had it in from multiple people. I decided to pull in the one I had from Benjamin S from Twitter. And by the way, if you're not following me on Twitter, go check the link in the video description for my handle and all the other social media platform. And the question is talking about containers, multiple app or service in a single container, or a single app and service per container. Remember, we are talking about containers. We are not talking about pods. Pods being the Kubernetes unit, right? So in my opinion, and I've seen people debating about this, but in my opinion, you should have only a single application or service or microservice or whatever it is in a container. There are multiple reasons why that is more reasonable, in my opinion. But the biggest one is you want to be able, so why would you run in a container? You would run your application in a container because either you want it to be able to scale independently, you want to be able to to have boundaries around the application, and you want to be able to take advantage of the fact that it's ephemeral. Now, we can argue that for the last two reasons, you may want to have multiple applications in a container, but apart of the deployment and the creation of the image is more complex. But the main advantage is that if you want to be able all of these pieces of applications and services to scale independently, and then you put more than one application or service in a container, then you cannot scale them independently. So unless you have, in my opinion, unless you have something that is really coupled one another, and in that case, again, as I mentioned before, probably there's something to change in your architecture, for example, or why do you need to make two different applications if they're really acting like one? But in other scenarios, I would say one service or application per container. Different thing is that if we're talking about pods can have multiple containers, but the principle are almost the same because pods in Kubernetes scale independently from one another, or one type of pod from another type of pod. So the only reason why I would have multiple services in a single pod or multiple container in a single pod is when I use like sidecar pattern or accessory containers. In that case, it's reasonable to have multiple containers per pod. But in general, I would say, and if you have a decent size of cluster or Kubernetes cluster, you probably do have sidecar containers. So that's kind of no-brainer. But the container itself, in my opinion, should have one single application or service. Do you agree with this? I hope you do. This is how I see it anyway. All right, still no questions from the chat. Come on, guys. Don't be shy. I'm here for trying and help you if you want. Another question I recently received a few times, and I guess it's because YouTube is pushing my video about the Azure Pipelines decorators. I have a lot of questions about Azure Pipelines lately. Seems like a lot of people are focusing more on Azure Pipelines than GitHub Actions for some reason. And actually, let me know in the chat if you prefer using GitHub Actions or you prefer using Azure Pipelines. I think that would be an interesting discussion. Anyway, the question I have lately is, or I had lately is, and actually this comes directly from GitHub, I guess. Let me double check. Yeah, this is Masilamani Sinivasan. Again, sorry for mispronouncing your name. From the GitHub repo, he opened an issue in the GitHub repo where I have my pipelines decorators examples and sources, and he's asking something that it's fairly important. So when you use build decorators, they work. If you use classic builds, they obviously works on classic builds. But if you're using them on YAML pipelines, then build decorators are injected for both normal jobs, so the CI jobs, and deployment jobs. And he was asking, how can I avoid that? How can I avoid that to happen for the deployment jobs? Because I want my decorators to be injected only in my normal jobs. Well, there's no direct way to do that. There's no way to specify, for example, in the manifest of the decorator that you want to have that only on normal jobs. Like there is no way to say directly, I want it only for deployment jobs. But luckily for us, there is one variable in the context of the decorator that you can use. So in the YAML of your decorator, you can have conditionals, and the conditionals are applied for pre-injection. So it's the conditional that is evaluated when the decorator is about to be injected. And you can check for environment.id. And this is because the deployment jobs have to be hooked up to a Azure DevOps environment to be able to work. So you will know for sure that if you are in a normal job, the environment.id variable will be empty, while if you are in a deployment job, your environment.id will have a value. This is the only way, to my knowledge at least, that you can check and discriminate if you are in a normal job or in a deployment job, and then you can base your logic around that. I double-checked the documentation also today ahead of this streaming to see if something has changed in the meantime, but there's nothing there. So I guess the only way is still to check for environment.id and see if it has a value or not, and then decide what to do with that. The other option you have is using the release decorators, but remember that those works only on the classic release pipelines, meaning the release pipelines from the UI. So that's the only thing. If you have YAML pipelines, you need to use the build decorators for, and that, as I mentioned, they are injected for both normal jobs and deployment jobs. Another question I had from Dev2 from Bartholomeus. This is related to DevOps in general, and if you know me, if you've been following me before, oh wait, we have another question from the chat. I would rather I don't know, this is not, I guess it's a question to my, it is an answer to my question. Using Azure DevOps pipelines over GitHub Actions, reusable templates in Azure DevOps works better than the GitHub Actions. Having a shared template repository helps keep pipelines somewhat consistent. I agree with you, but have you tried the new reusable templates? Because with the before in GitHub Actions we only had the composite actions, and that was like a half-baked template, if you will. With the reusable templates in GitHub Actions, we can create basically a repo with the templates and then pull the templates from there. I agree with you for one thing, which is reusable templates as well as composite actions cannot still be used from private repos. So if you have a private repo with your templates or reusable templates, those cannot be consumed from basically anywhere else apart from the same repo. So that obviously is a downside. And I hope I think the team will address that, because if you look at the public roadmap of GitHub Actions, you'll see that they are working on providing support for using GitHub Actions templates and also normal composite actions from within or from private repos. So that is coming, but yeah, as of right now, as of right now, that is a limitation. And I believe you still can't pass parameters in the new reusable in GitHub, right? No, you actually can. So, but it's it's not that straightforward. So if you have like a variable in the main pipeline, the template, the reusable template, doesn't have access to that variable. However, you can specify parameters when you consume the template. So in your template definition, you have a section at the top in which you can specify input parameters and secrets as inputs. And then when you consume, when you call it from the caller workflow, you can pass that you can pass the inputs and the secrets that you want to be used in that reusable template. So there is that one. The limitation is that, again, that if you don't use that way, you try and rely on variables. Those are not passed basically to they are not expanded into the reusable template. Yeah, that's true. So again, if you have private repos and you want to host your reusable templates in private repos, yeah, that's definitely a limitation, and there's no solution for that at the moment. Well, yeah, no, there's no solution for that at the moment. But thanks for letting me know. It's great to have this kind of conversation, I guess. Another question I have, and this is what I was saying from Bartholomeus on Dev2, is I lost the window. Yeah, can you shift left on anything else aside security and testing? And this was a tricky question. I had to sit down a while and think, because we all talk about shifting left on testing, then we talk about shifting left on security, but what else you can shift left? And the only thing I could think of is if I want to shift left the validation, and especially the validation of the business value of something. And I think is the next thing, and it's partially done already by DevOps and by delivering value continuously and very quickly. But I still see a lot of companies working in kind of what I would define like a wrong way. And what I mean by that is they, even though they use Scrum, for example, and they deploy multiple times a day, they don't take the time to verify that what they are actually working on and deploying is what they provide business value, what the users want. I think that you need to shift left on that as well and try to understand and validate that what you're working on provides business value to you, to your users, to your to your clients and whatnot, because you can be as agile as you want, you can be as fast at deploying as you want, but if you don't take your time and validate the business value of what you're doing, then you're doing everything for nothing. So I think that is the next thing I would concentrate on, shifting left, because as soon as you can start validating the business value of what you're doing, the better it is. Do you think there's anything else we can shift left on? I couldn't think of anything else apart from testing, security, and validation of business value. But if you can think of anything else, let me know. I would be really interested. Michael says he also prefers Azure DevOps because of the visual release pipeline editor. Yeah, that's true. One thing that a lot of companies still use the Azure DevOps pipelines for, or because of, are the visual editors. For the build pipelines, you can use the YAML and use the I don't know how they call it, like the visual editor as well, like on the side, and it helps a bit. And then you can get advantage of the UI-ish editing, but also the YAML part. For the release, yeah, the visual release process of Azure Pipelines it's much nicer than just YAML. How do you drive when releasing too many environments with many steps per release? You mean in the YAML pipeline, or the YAML pipeline you could create different templates. You can break the pipeline in different sections, if you will, and then it's also better to maintain, because you probably need to do the same things for each environment, and you can add some specificity for the different environments. That's what I would do. I'm not sure who you're asking if is German. I'm definitely not German. I'm Italian, but I live in Hong Kong. That's why I have this kind of funny accent, I guess. So if the question was for me, no, I'm not German. So what else? Is DevOps worth if someone is into deep learning? If yes, how to get started? So I know, and this is definitely not my area of expertise, I know that there is something called ML ops, and there's also data ops and those kind of things. It is something I've never had the time to focus too much on, so I'm definitely not an expert. But yeah, I would look into the ML ops processes, and I know that could be fairly useful. But as I said, I've never had the chance to experiment with it myself. Kevin, have you used the Secure DevOps kit for Azure? It seems like a nice toolkit, but with it being sunset, is there another tool you would suggest to help secure pipelines? Good question. Yeah, I used the Secure DevOps kit for Azure a while back, and I was really surprised that they were kind of deprecating it. The thing is that there's no equivalent in terms of package solution with everything in it. But there are, if you go to the page, I guess it's on the GitHub page where the Secure DevOps kit was or is present. They have links to some of the replacements that could be used. But yeah, I haven't another toolkit to secure pipelines. I have to say that lately I've been working much more with GitHub Actions. But all I do around that, even with pipelines before, is trying to secure the most likely the deployments and the source code, not the pipeline itself, because securing the pipeline can have different meaning, of course. But what I try to do is, since I use either YAML pipelines or GitHub Actions that are still YAML, I make that part of the code review process. So I'm sure that no malevolent code is injected into the pipeline or in the actions. But then I would rather use tools like for example, Datri for Kubernetes deployment. I made a video about that a while back, which is a fantastic tool in my opinion. I fell in love with the product, and that would validate your deployment or your manifest files for Kubernetes in this case, to make sure they respect the best practices. There's no leaks and whatnot. And I would do the same for the different deployment targets. And if we talk about Azure, what I like to do is having Azure policies in place, and I develop the Azure policies, or I apply the Azure policies that that are specific for the type of deployment or environments I'm trying to secure. And that together with Azure Monitor, it gives you a fairly accurate, if you will, scenario. Of course, it's better to use, as I mentioned, like for Kubernetes, tools like Datri, because it gives you a feedback before even you hit the deployment target. Unfortunately, there are no tools like Datri for many other platforms. You will need to use something like the ARM validator for ARM templates, for example. I know there's something else for Terraform as well. Yeah, it was nice having that all-in-one kit, but unfortunately, I don't think there's a replacement. Another question from Naga Venkata Prasad: how to migrate on-premise apps to Azure DevOps environment? assume on-prem is also using some DevOps tool. Well, you don't migrate apps to Azure DevOps environments. Azure DevOps environments are a logical representation of your deployment targets, if you will. So I'm not sure I'm not sure how to answer this question, but if you want to migrate your app, so you're doing some DevOps on-prem with something, and then you want to move over to Azure DevOps, then if you're using Git, I would say the easiest thing you can do is a Git clone mirror, and then push that to Azure DevOps. And then I don't think there's any migrator tool to help you, for example, redeploying or not redeploying, sorry, to help you migrate some CI/CD workflows. One thing that is very simple is if you're using Azure DevOps Server, or even if you're using TFS on-prem, then the migration path is very simple. You can basically export your database, import it into Azure DevOps Online, and that's it. If you're coming from other tools, then it's a little bit more complex. The easier part is the source code. The rest, I'm afraid you need to do it manually and recreate your CI/CD workflows and so on and so forth. I will drink some more. All right. I like that we had quite a few questions from the audience. Keep it coming. I still have time and a fair amount of energy, even though it's already 10:30 p.m. my time. I still have 2 more offline questions I get, and again, this is another question that, or another comment rather, that I've had fairly frequently on many of my YouTube videos, especially the YouTube videos in which I talk about GitHub environments and GitHub secrets. And there's multiple people saying that they don't have secrets in their GitHub. Now, this is quite unlikely, I have to say. First of all, because the repository secrets, to my knowledge, are available to everyone. So no matter if you have GitHub Free or GitHub Enterprise Cloud, you do have the repository secrets. Is one of the foundations of GitHub Actions. GitHub Actions uses the repository secrets for consuming secrets. The thing you may not have instead are the environment secrets. And that's because of platform limitations. And what I mean by that is environments themselves are available for if we talk about the free accounts, they are available only for public repos. You cannot get environments in private repos on free accounts, but even on teams. The only way you can get the GitHub environments, GitHub Action environments in private repos is if you are on GitHub Enterprise Cloud. Unfortunately, this is the only way you can get those. There's no other way. So that is one of the possibilities. So if you're looking for environments in your private repos and you don't have them, it's because you're not on Enterprise Cloud. I know it's not the best thing, because environments will be very, very useful on private repos, but there's I think it's been a commercial choice from GitHub to do that, and therefore there's nothing we can do, I guess, apart from signing a petition or something. King say hi, Dave. Hi, nice to see you here. What do we have? I think we have another question from Kevin. Do you have suggestions for getting developer support for code analysis as part of development pipeline? Many smaller dev group don't like to have their mistakes surfaced to management. Developer support for code analysis. I'm not sure what you mean by getting developer support. You mean how to make them accept code analysis? Well, if that's the question, I would say have them running code analysis before committing. So of course it depends on the code base, it depends on the language, it depends on many factors, but there are tools out there that allows you to run code analysis in a very quick way and only on the delta of the things you've changed. And that is perfect because I can run it on my own machine, for example, when I'm developing. So I immediately see if there's something I would rather have to make better or whatnot. So I would say encourage them to run that on their machine first, maybe just in the incremental way, and then have the full code analysis running on the CI system, and also make them understand that this is not for blaming them. So code analysis and things like CodeQL in GitHub and all those kind of tools are not designed to put the blame on someone. They are designed for them to be able to improve the overall quality of the code they make and the other developers in the organization make. And this is very important also, that if anything is surfaced to management or to team leaders, that there's no one should be blamed for errors. There's the best way would be sitting down, explain maybe to the more junior devs why that the solution is not as good as they may think it is, and so on and so forth. I know that he said I had to push back with adding code checks as part of the pipeline. You definitely should address that, but I think again, you need to find a way to turn around the thing. Again, don't blame anyone for that, but just rather take it as an opportunity for growth. This is my suggestion. Another question. When I try to run CI pipelines for deploying Docker containers into AKS, it gives me error failed to create an app in Azure AD. Please check if user have privileges on current subscription. That is can be different things. I would need to know more about your CI pipeline. Can be few things. One can be that your pipeline is trying to create a service principal, and you don't, the user that the CI is running doesn't have permissions to create a service principal, and I think that could be one of the could be the reason, because I've seen people doing this before. So whenever you deploy a container into AKS, actually you deploy a container first into something like Azure Container Registry, and then AKS pulls it from Azure Container Registry. And to pull it from Azure Container Registry, it needs to have a secret, which basically are the credentials for consuming the container from the registry. And I've seen people creating a service principal that is basically that contain those credentials for AKS to consume ACR, and then basically create it ex novo every time and then passing it to the cluster for authentication. So this, I think, could be the problem. Check your pipeline if you're creating a new service principal on the fly every time you deploy. And if that's the case, you need to make sure that the user that your pipeline is running with have enough privileges or enough privileges for creating service principals. If that's not the case, I believe that could be also you may be using service principals for something else, and there must be some sort of authentication mechanism for your pipelines to run, perhaps on self-hosted runners or self-hosted agents. But I think the previous one I mentioned is the most likely cause of your problem. Okay, let me address the last offline question I have, and then we see if we have something else from the chat. This one is from Alexander Ivanov from YouTube, And this was related to a video I made recently about the new GitHub release system that has automated or allows you to do automated release notes. And the way it works is basically it collects all the commit messages you have from the commit ranges that are into that specific release and try to make something more readable based on those commit messages. So the question Alexander, I believe, yeah, Alexander Ivanov was asking is, should we rely on this commits message as changelog entries, or is better having a different changelog? And as usual, as often at least, the answer is it depends. First of all, it depends on how you use or what you put in the commit messages. I'm a big believer that the commit messages should be as descriptive as possible, but without being like a whole page of thing. So if you do your commit messages fairly well, they are fairly descriptive, then I would say you can rely on those commit messages for your changelog, because they, as I mentioned, they are fairly descriptive. If instead you just, your commit message is changed code that doesn't give you any information about what you've actually done, then I would say first you have a problem, because your devs should be able to to create better commit messages, but also you can't rely on that for your changelog. So that's the first thing. Second thing I would say, it also depends on the frequency of your deployments, because if you deploy fairly frequently, then you will have just a handful of commits in each release. Therefore, you can rely on those commit messages to have your changelog. But if you deploy or if you create a release once a week, you probably have a lot of different commits in that release. So you would end up having a changelog that is massive. And again, if it's too big, no one would read it, so it loses value. So in that case, again, I would say you probably want to take the commit messages and massage them a bit so you create something that is more readable and more meaningful. That's my opinion, at least. But I think that this new feature of GitHub, it's really interesting, because for many people I know that they do like nice, concise but meaningful commit messages. This is a feature that saves them a lot of time. All right, so, and with that said, I think I went over all my 10 questions I collected offline. As you can see, I had some questions from Dev2, where I have all my articles. We had some questions from Twitter, from Patreon, from Discord. So if you wanna follow me on any of those platforms, please do. You can find a link in the video description for all of social media and all the platforms. Join our Discord server. It's completely free, and you can interact with the community of like-minded people that love DevOps, Azure DevOps, and GitHub. We have different sections. So if you have any questions, excuse me, if you have any questions at any time about any of those topics, you can find your answers there, or at least have healthy discussions with people of any any kind of maturity when it comes to those tools. So I would encourage you to join the CoderDave Discord server. Again, you have the link in the description of every video. All right, do you guys have any other question from me in the chat? Let's wait for a few more minutes. What can I tell you in the meantime? Yeah, as I was saying in the beginning, I know there's a lot of more people that there were not here in the beginning. If you're following my channel, you know that this is not the usual streaming setup I have, and the reason is we have moved to a new place, and so the old studio is no more, and the new studio is not available yet because I'm still doing some work, so I need to set up everything. So today this is what we get. Hopefully it's been good enough. I hope that the video quality should be all right. I don't know the audio. I've never used this headset before for streaming, so I hope is been good enough. And I don't think there's any other questions, so I will wait just a few more minutes just to see if someone has any other question. But allow me to thank you all for being with me tonight, or at least my night is 10:30 p.m. here. Oh, yes, we do have another question. From Agrim Singh, I have a private custom action which is running properly, but a post step of that step fails, saying it's not able to find action.yaml. This is interesting. So it's this is interesting. I've never encountered this. I would recommend you to turn on the debugging information. I don't have the link handy right now, also because I'm streaming from the laptop. I normally have like 3 monitors, and I feel very bad with just a laptop and one single monitor. So I don't have the links handy, but yeah, and is specifying it is a custom composite action. Yeah, it's probably well, if your custom composite action is on a private repo and you're trying to consume it from another repo, that's the reason it would not work. You cannot consume a custom or a composite action from a private repo, or I mean, if it's hosted on a private repo. But I believe that's not the case. So what I would do is enabling the debug information in the actions. There are 2 things you can enable. One is the workflow debug, and the other one is the runner logs. And with those 2, you should be able to understand why that message is coming, where it is coming from, and what GitHub is trying to connect to when it says that it cannot find the YAML. You can check on like on Google GitHub Actions debug or debug log, and you will find the link. I will try to put it in the video description in the resources. So if you're watching this later, you may be able to find it there, but it should be fairly easy to find. Kevin says video and audio were good. Thanks for the Ask Me Anything. Well, more than happy to do it. I don't do it too often because I want to collect some interesting questions first, but it's something that I will try and do maybe more often. Kevin say thanks. Yeah, more than happy to help. I do enjoy this kind of more relaxed live streams. I do also sometimes live streams with guests, or talking about a specific topic, and I have the Build With Me series. I don't know if you guys have seen it, in which I try to build something in the CI/CD system, for example, together. But I do enjoy this kind of Q&A sessions. All right, I think that with this, it's been about an hour. I think I'll close it here. I don't have a closing music or anything today because, as I mentioned, I'm just on the laptop. But next streaming, hopefully my new studio will be ready, and we will have everything in place once again. So, all right, thanks so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. Hit the like button below if you did enjoy, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one. And once again, thanks for being with me tonight, or today, this afternoon, or whatever time is in wherever you are. With this, thanks again, and bye.